Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai needed to get out of Jerusalem and fast. The revolt against the Romans, now in its third year, was failing, and the city was under siege. And the first century sages, Ben Zakkai, among the finest of them, knew that the fall of Jerusalem would surely spell disaster for the Jewish people. Perhaps it would be better to concede the battle and sue for peace rather than lose the war and Judaism with it. Only the Roman general Vespasian could negotiate a ceasefire, and he was camped outside the city walls. But Ben Zakkai's attempts to leave the city and meet with Vespasian were thwarted, and not by the Romans, but by Jewish zealots who were hell-bent on fighting until the bitter end. Finally, when the Romans cut off the food supply to the city, Ben Zakkai, who was desperate to save his people, sent for Abba Sikara, who was the leader of the zealots, who also happened to be his sister's son. "Until how long will you continue to do this and kill everyone through starvation?" Ben Zakkai demanded of his nephew. "What can I do?" he replied. "If I relent, the zealots will murder me. Then show me some secret way to leave the city, so that there might be some small salvation for our people." Together they devised a plan. Ben Zakkai would feign a mortal illness. After faking his own death, Ben Zakkai's colleagues would then carry him out of Jerusalem in plain sight, claiming that they were taking his body to be buried at the Mount of Olives just outside the city. Their plot succeeded. When the coffin of the great sage reached the city's walls, the zealots' guards parted and the gates opened. But the negotiation with Vespasian did not go as planned. He refused to break the siege. "Only the destruction of the city will end the rebellion," he insisted. Hearing this news, Ben Zakkai had every cause to despair, to return to Jerusalem in defeat, and to accept that the only path forward was to die for the sanctification of God's name and to watch as the temple's walls crumbled and its sanctuary burned. But fortunately for us, Ben Zakkai saw another way. He told Vespasian that his ascension to the emperor's throne was preordained, and minutes later, an emissary arrived announcing the death of Nero and the intention of the noblemen of Rome to appoint Vespasian in his place. Astonished, Vespasian accepted the words of the sage as prophecy and granted Ben Zakkai one wish in return for his wisdom. "Give me the town of Yavne and its sages," Ben Zakkai replied. Vespasian agreed. So Ben Zakkai turned west, and with Jerusalem at his back, he began the 30-mile journey to his new home and an uncertain future. Imagine the shock on the faces of his disciples when Ben Zakkai, a man they believed to be dead, walked through the doors of the Beit Midrash, the house of study. But it was not just Ben Zakkai that was resurrected in Yavne. It was Judaism itself. For more than 2,000 years, Judaism has been a religion of resurrection. Though most associate a life beyond the grave with another ancient religion that was born of the temple's destruction, it was the prophet Daniel who first imagined that at the end of a long period of national suffering, those that sleep in the dust of the earth would awake, some to everlasting abhorrence, some to reproaches, and some to eternal life. But when our long exile began and the certainty of our redemption faded into a hazy dream of a far-off messianic future, the rabbinic vision of Olam Haba, the world to come, came into focus. Our trials in this world would be rewarded, our sages assured us, in an idyllic afterlife that would accompany the coming of the true Messiah. As the world around us grew darker and meaner, as the word Jew became a term of derision and hatred, it was our steadfast belief that God would redeem us at the completion of our earthly suffering that reassured us and gave us hope. The concept of the world to come became so firmly entrenched in our minds, such a foundational component of our Judaism, that centuries later, Maimonides wrote in his commentary on the Mishnah, resurrection of the dead, an idea, by the way, mentioned nowhere in the Torah, is one of the cardinal principles of our faith established by Moses, our teacher. A person who does not believe in this principle has no real religion, and certainly not Judaism. At least twice, we affirm our belief in the resurrection of the dead each morning. When we awaken, we open our eyes and we recite the words of Modeh Ani, I acknowledge before you, living and everlasting God, that you have restored the soul that left my body as I slept, as a sign of your compassion and your faithfulness. In the second blessing of the Amidah, Techiyat HaMeitim, God's ability to bring life to lifelessness serves as the embodiment of our awe in God's might and God's strength. And though some liberal movements have altered or removed these words from the Siddur altogether, we conservative Jews have preserved them. Because even if we cannot bring ourselves to believe in the literal truth of this doctrine, we can see God's hand in the reanimation of human tissue, in the blooming of trees and flowers after a long cold winter, and in the faces of our children and grandchildren who bear the countenance and spirit of our parents and grandparents. However, as the story of Yochanan ben Zakkai reminds us, resurrection is a process that ends in renewal. But to be reborn, we must first endure the stinging pain of loss and the uncertainty and disorienting rootlessness of an undetermined period of grief. In Judaism, there is no such thing as the fountain of youth. There is no elixir that grants us eternality. Our tradition teaches us that paradoxically, sometimes, if we want to live, we have to experience death first. Today, each of us faces a similar choice. We have come here on this Yom Kippur seeking not just a reprieve from our sins, but a renewal on our lease on life. We have come here to let go of our selfishness, of our bitterness, of our disappointment in ourselves and in others, so that we can allow our generosity and our optimism and a newfound sense of sacred purpose to take hold. We have come here to destroy the parts of ourselves that have cost us relationships and opportunities for growth, and to rediscover our ability to build connections and fellowship and develop creativity and empathy. We have come here, perhaps unknowingly, perhaps unwillingly, for resurrection. As it was for the Jewish community of the first century, the decision that we face is not an easy one. But for Ben Zakkai and his generation, the temple brought to an end not only thousands of Jewish lives, but also represented the end of their religious practice as they knew it. How agonizingly difficult it must have been to let go of so much that was so precious to so many. Who among them would have imagined that the risk that they were taking, that the Judaism that they were reinventing would have to sustain the Jewish people throughout 2,000 long years of wandering and exile? How much self-doubt did they overcome? How much anger and resentment did they face when they finally made the choice to turn their backs and retreat from their rightful home in Jerusalem, knowing for sure, not for sure, when they might see the place that could contain God in all his glory again? And make no mistake, when we begin our journey towards resurrection, we are not just turning our backs on sin. We are also turning away from something we believed to be an essential part of ourselves. This is the beginning of my 5th year here in Dallas. However, it's really only the last year or so that I have come to feel that I am putting my life on the line each time I pull out of my driveway. Every day, without fail, As I make my way down Hillcrest Avenue, it seems that only the hand of God is saving me from a devastating car accident. I can't remember the last time I drove from home to shul without being tailgated, without a driver cutting her left turn through my lane so dangerously close, even though there is not a single car behind me. At first, I was simply scared, clutching my steering wheel so tightly that you could see the fingerprints in the leather. But after I realized that these maniacs were not only risking my life, but the life of the 2-year-old strapped into the car seat behind me, I began to get angry. Who did these people think they were? The injustice, the entitlement, the recklessness infuriated me. And for what? So that these Meshuggahs could get where they were going 30 seconds faster. And I would be damned if they were going to get away with behaving this way. I began to believe that if I honked loud enough or long enough, if I could just speed up and pull alongside them and give them a taste of my outrage, maybe, just maybe, I could get one of these idiots to understand that they were putting my life and my daughter's life in danger. And then, one day, after blasting a car with a texting driver that had swerved into my lane, I looked in my rearview mirror and I realized that I had just run a stop sign. My choice to be angry had made me just as dangerous a driver as those who sparked my anger in the first place. After years of building up our anger, our boredom, our fear, and our despair, the very emotions that protect us from making the bold decisions that might earn us salvation, we have come to believe that these feelings are us, that they are as essential to our everyday life as the temple was to everyday worship in ancient Jerusalem. But as Rabbi Alan Liu writes in his masterwork on the Days of Awe as a Journey of Transformation, when the gates of heaven are open and we are finally awake, we can see that they are not. We can see that they are just impulses arising for a moment, the way wind and rain and snow arise for a moment in the world. They are not us. The great drama of this season is choice. We can choose to let go of guilt, of impatience, and dejection. We can choose this moment by moment, or we can make a broader choice as well. And at least when it comes to driving, I have made the decision to let go of my anger. And thanks to that choice, I have not only a safer and much more enjoyable commute to work, but a much happier passenger in my wife. But Yom Kippur is not just about our individual choices, our own personal resurrection, but that of the larger community. After all, so many of our prayers on Yom Kippur are formulated not in the singular, but in the plural. It is all of us who have stolen, all of us who have cheated, all of us who have lied, and all of us who have sinned. When Yochanan ben Zakkai escaped Jerusalem, he saved himself and many of his colleagues, but his crusade to save our faith and our people had only begun. At Yavne, Ben Zakkai established an academy that turned our religion on its head. Before the fall of Jerusalem, ritual took place primarily through ritual animal sacrifice at the temple. And access to the temple was restricted to an elite few. And direct encounters with God, they occurred once a year when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement. But the Judaism of the sages could be practiced anywhere. It was not centralized, but local. The home and the synagogue became our temples, the reading stand and the Shabbat table our altars. Knowledge once restricted to scribes and elders was now shared widely through an ever-evolving oral tradition that continues to this day. And God's presence, once confined to a small room with locked doors, could now be found wherever Jews opened their hearts and their mouths to pray. On Yom Kippur, this precious opportunity to gather together as one community, it's the perfect time to ask ourselves, what is it that we are holding on to that prevents us from hastening the revival of Jewish life? What are the forms we are reluctant to abandon, perhaps at the cost of the goals that we are trying to achieve? And though it's tempting to rattle off a list of places where we might begin to answer this question, I hope that we can all take some pride and some inspiration in a small but powerful resurrection that has already begun inside these very walls. Last year on Yom Kippur, our religious school began its third year in a row under new leadership. Only this time, it was my turn. Now, the buzz in the greater Sheriff community was that we needed to do something about our numbers. Our classrooms were not nearly as full as they had been in the past. But after my co-directors, Rabbi Wallach and Sarah Lipinski, and I spent the summer listening to some concerns from parents, we discovered that though there was some consternation about dwindling enrollment, their chief concern was a feverish panic about Hebrew reading. Many were worried that their children wouldn't have the necessary skills to participate in our services or to read Torah and Haftarah at their bar or bat mitzvah. A quick assessment of our students confirmed that we had our work cut out for us. 3/4 of our sixth graders scored below 70% in identifying their letters and below 50% in reading accuracy. Not only that, their scores had dropped dramatically over the summer when they were not practicing. How could this be happening, we asked ourselves, when half of our classroom hours are devoted to building these very skills? When we sought the advice of a few experts in the field, we were told that our expectations were too high, that the kind of literacy that we were looking for couldn't be achieved at a twice-a-day supplementary school. Maybe we should give up our emphasis on Hebrew and focus more time on experiential learning. But we were determined to find a solution because that's what our families were asking of us. And a month or so into the school year, we discovered the problem. It wasn't how much time we were devoted to Hebrew. It was how we were teaching it. We had become so focused on the integrity of the group, so obsessed with how many children there were in each class, that at times we had lost touch with the needs of the individuals that comprised it. In talking to our students, we found that many were intimidated or embarrassed when reading in front of their entire class, and our students' learning styles required an approach that could account for multiple types of intelligences. Suddenly, the solution to a very complex problem became very simple. We stopped teaching Hebrew in a group setting and instead set up individual stations designed to stimulate different kinds of learning: visual learning, oral learning, digital learning, in addition to giving each student one-on-one time with their teacher. At the beginning of this year, we assessed our students again. Not only did 9 out of 10 students score between 85 and 100% for both reading accuracy and letter recognition, their scores were nearly identical to where they were at the end of the previous year. What we have seen in our school over the past year, and not just in Hebrew class, is nothing short of a resurrection. Our parents are happier, our kids are enjoying the learning, and the enrollment in our earliest grades is double what it used to be. We have a long way to go and a lot of difficult choices ahead of us as a synagogue community and as a conservative movement about what to preserve and what to reimagine. But what we learn from our students is that the revitalization of Judaism depends upon our willingness at times to let go of certain long-held assumptions, chief among them that quantity is the greatest indicator of quality. Instead of focusing all of our energy on gathering 1,000 people in a room, as important as that may be from time to time, we need to consider the possibility that gathering 50 people in 20 rooms can be both more productive and more powerful. Because ultimately, we are not in the business of filling rooms. We are in the business of filling hearts. And the strength of our community is not in its size, but in its ability to draw us closer together in our devotion to God and to each other. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotsk was one of the great Hasidic masters of the 19th century. And one day, according to legend, a Jewish freethinker living in the shtetl confronted the Rebbe with a provocative question. He brazenly asked Menachem Mendel, "Do you really believe in the resurrection of the dead?" The Rebbe thought for a moment and then exclaimed, "I believe in the resurrection of the living." So did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So do I. And so, I hope, do you. But the gates of Jerusalem, like the gates of repentance, will not remain open forever. May we each be granted the wisdom, the faith, and the courage to let go of the fears and the failings that have imprisoned our souls, so that we may each pass through the other side in safety, ready to emerge with renewed conviction and hope. For Ne'ilah approaches, the hour grows late, and the time of our resurrection is at hand. Shabbat Shalom.